All right, morning and welcome to SPC's Active Transportation Forum. I'm Leanne Taney, an active transportation planner with SPC. I'll be facilitating today's meeting. We're excited about the agenda featuring some topics related to implementation of our active transportation plan update. There's many people in the room and analyzing that virtual call. We're on the steering committee and are aware of the progress on that. We anticipate that being adopted by the commission later this month and then being released to the public at that point. But at any rate, whether you're attending in person or virtually, giving value your time, input, and feedback, and it's very important to advancing our regional planning efforts. So thank you for joining. And then we'll move on to some housekeeping for those attending in person. If you need to use the restrooms, both these sides, we're out here, kind of follow the wall to the right. There's signs and the restrooms are out in the lobby. And then if you didn't sign in sheet when you came in, please do that before you leave. And then we'll move on to introductions. If you're attending virtually, if your name is not showing on the screen, you can enter that into the chat box. And then we'll do introductions in room. And so we'll start with you and then to Peter and go around the room.
Yes, my name is Julia Garrett, and I'm the DM Quinton.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Quintanilla. I'm from Michael Baker. I'm Mike Penzita. I'm one of the engineers at the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure at the city.
I'm Greg Forrest. I work on part of Zibo and Mount Lebanon.
Enter on like GAI Consultants. I'm Evan Shaw, Solo Manager of Operation Safety at SPC.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anthony Hickton. I'm manager of the TDM program here at SPC.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Edwards. I'm a local government planner at ACEP.
Hi, Devin White, manager of transit programs here at SPC. Chris Jaros, data analyst at SPC.
Jack Casey, Councilman Town McCandless.
Ed Engler, Rachel Carson, Child Concerns.
Molly Sarper, local government planning specialist of these.
Iowa Breach.
Becky Butler, Washington County Planning. And I'm the Dean Data Analyst at SPC.
Eric Porter, with Lake Pittsburgh.
Trez Jones, Planning and Zoning Official for Indiana Borough.
Patrick Connors, executive director for the Quaker Valley Council of Governments.
All right, and then Roy Mary.
For a while, Trail Volunteer Fund, Steel Valley Volunteer. Mary Shaw, Trail Volunteer Fund, Sailboat Urban Coalition, Bike Fit Committee, and Curdy non-bike fit.
All right, great. Thanks so much for the introductions and again for joining today. We'll get started with our first presentation and speaker, which will be Evan Shaw, manager of our operations and safety team. And when you're ready, yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you. You guys mind if I just stay here?
That works for you.
Stand up. Okay.
So yeah, Julie will pull that presentation up and then we'll get started. Yeah, it's going to be the, I'll let you explain, David. What it is.
This one, yeah. Okay. All right. So, as any of you may know, SPC was awarded the Safe Streets for All grant for design of a regional safety or a comprehensive safety action plan. So that was in fiscal year 2023. It took a little bit of time to get things rolling. But that started, I would say, in early 2024. Selected a consultant team, which was Kinley Orange, and sub-consultant AE Comms in French engineering. So we've been working on this project now for probably, let's say, close to 10 months, I would say. So we've worked through the process to get to combining some of the earlier meetings and stakeholder meetings to get to the point where we're at right now. So we're forming a safety action plan. So safety action plan is, I'm sure most of you know this, but a comprehensive safety plan aimed at reducing and eliminating fatal or serious injury crashes. And then action plans use data analysis to characterize roadway safety problems to strengthen a community's approach to projects and strategies that address those safety risks. And then you can see on the right, the safety plan components. leadership commitment to the target goal, safety analysis and equity analysis, engagement and collaboration, policy review, strategy and project selections, and then progress tracking and transparency through that. So why it's important, obviously, to provide a structured approach to prioritize and implement roadway safety improvements, allowing targeted investments, clear communication with stakeholders, and increased access to funding opportunities, which was an FHWA quote. And the benefits of the safety action plans are just establishing a data-driven process for more informed decision-making, and then progress tracking through those that process, and then optimize the available funding, take advantage of what's available out there, since there seems to be some opportunities for that right now, and then build consensus and trust among community stakeholders and roadway owners. Obviously, there's some concern that people that think that safety is the number one priority for folks. And then just like I mentioned before, performance monitoring and the transparency of the solutions that you pick there. So we've all seen this chart on the right before, the safe systems approach that, safe road user, safe vehicle, safe speed, safe roads, post-crash care will all help to eliminate fatal injuries. And then the Vision Zero approach is that, the traditional approach was the traffic deaths were inevitable, to try to perfect the human behavior, prevent collisions. Individuals are responsible, and then saving lives is actually expensive. Whereas the Vision Zero approach is kind of counter to all of those things. Traffic deaths are preventable. To integrate human failing into the approach to account for it, prevents fatal and serious crashes by eliminating speeds. And then saving lives is actually not as expensive as it needs to be previously. So some of the safety emphasis areas that we've identified throughout this process, you could see not all these, the percentage total add up to 100 just because some of these could be involved in more than one crash. More of these factors can be involved in one crash than this one. So, obviously, top concern in our area is intersections. Allegheny County has a plethora of anywhere where you have, you're introducing possible collisions and things like that where people are crossing paths, you're going to have, a number. But then in some of our more urban or rural, outlying municipalities in Allegheny County, lane departures are a problem, which is also, one of those speed and distracted driving issues. So those kind of factor into that as well. No seatbelt use. And these are all things that can be solved by maybe some education and outreach. Obviously, there's some of that out there right now. I saw a billboard the other day on State Route 51 that said 93% of traffic fatalities in Pennsylvania could be prevented in the last 5 years or something like that. So there's crash data, and in that crash data, the police reports kind of go over some of those factors. And, that's obviously something that maybe not through an engineering study or things like that we could solve, but just education and outreach to the people that are actually operating the cars. Next slide, please. So some of those safety emphasis areas, like you can see there at the top, intersections, 43% of the overall total crashes. But then some of those overrepresented safety emphasis areas are things that we feel like we could focus on. So the lane departure crashes, as you see, are 22% of the overall crashes, but actually 32% of the overall fatal and serious injury crashes. Seatbelt usage is another one of those things. Like I said, it's a simple fix, just educating the public on, speed and use of a seatbelt can save your life. Speaking from personal experience, impaired driving, 10%, but with a 24% chance of fatal or serious injury and crash. Motorcycles as well. That's one that's pretty high in our region, especially at the beginning part of this year. We've seen quite a few motorcycle fatalities just this past weekend on Brownsville Road. Pedestrians, same thing. Those are kind of considered vulnerable road users. They aren't afforded the protections of, vehicular passenger. So, just ways to try to increase the safety for those users of the roadway. Next slide. So this is the vulnerable road user heat map. So this is kind of just showing you where, there's a higher number of those vulnerable road user, non-motorist, pedestrian, or cyclist crashes. And they're kind of in places where we would envision, right? Downtown Pittsburgh, where there's a lot of intersections, with more volume with cars and pedestrians, potential conflict points. Oakland there, some of those other East End neighborhoods, South Side, along 837 Carson Street. So not really a big surprise here, but just kind of highlighting some of those areas where there's, And then as you can see at the bottom, the percentage of those crashes that occur in the city of Pittsburgh compared to the Allegheny County, 58% of those total crashes actually occurring in the city of Pittsburgh, with 41% of the fatal crashes occurring in the city of Pittsburgh. So through the stakeholder interview process, we interviewed a list of stakeholders to the left, quite a few. Those were all kind of individual meetings. They weren't necessarily all in the same meeting. So we felt like we could get a little bit more open responses, that people were less weary of speaking out, in front of other groups, maybe. But then some of the topics on the right were things that we had come up with. Collaboration. One of the things that's really high on the list, and I think it is what it is. I guess there's nothing really that I know how to explain it, but there's a lot of confusion on who is responsible for things along the roadway, whether it's a local road, a state-owned road. Municipalities still have responsibilities along state-owned roadway, especially things like signage and pavement markings in places. And just getting that understanding for people that don't know that they're actually responsible for those things and that they need to maintain them, I think would be paramount in this process. Just try to get things, how I want to say it, for user expectancy. It's like whenever you're driving down the roadway, you want things to kind of like look the same. You want everybody to be able to recognize, that the stop sign looks like a stop sign, and that there are standards out there, and that there's certain places that put stop signs in places where they just want to put stop signs. Things that can create issues, further down the road than, doing things the right way. So, and then also multi-municipal plans, projects for corridors, consistency at the county level, which would just be, if you have a roadway passing through your municipality, instead of trying to, plan or design things specifically for your municipality, work together with your partners, your neighbors, to try to get things consistent along the whole corridor. And then inconsistencies at signalized intersections where, pedestrian phasing might be different at one light compared to the next light. And then, try to work together for a corridor-wide section. Same way with road infrastructure. Some of those older 4-lane cross-section arterial roadways going through our municipalities where people, want to walk and bike. The volumes aren't necessarily there. Trying to decrease the asphalt width, carway width, so people can reuse those roadways for other things. Implement traffic calming, which is essentially what I just spoke of, and then eliminate infrastructure gaps. I think we're going to speak on that a little bit later here today. And then increase transit accessibility, ensure consistent vulnerable road user safety features, sidewalks, curb ramps, crosswalks with signs and markings where they're at. Post-crash care, traffic calming devices that minimize the impacts of emergency vehicles. So, that's speed tables and not necessarily speed humps. Expand emergency vehicle preemption system deployments. That's so emergency vehicles can get through intersections a little bit easier without having to manage users. Investigate a county-wide emergency vehicle preemption system. So, and then through education enforcement, like I mentioned earlier, this is where we really could make an impact. So, education campaign for drivers and pedestrians, urban walking and biking, safe street crossings, distracted walking, distracted driving, the importance of seatbelts, and then driving through work zones, which is one thing that Pennsylvania has done recently with the young driver education through work zones program. Increased parking enforcement in bike lanes, intersections, loading zones at near schools, which obviously makes it difficult across the street, limiting site visibility and things. Increase speeding and aggressive driving enforcement, increase DUI and seatbelt enforcement, investigate driver education opportunities in school. And one thing that we didn't hit on here is just increase commercial driver education and enforcement as well. And through the technology to deploy automated red light running systems, investigate automated enforcement for speeding, investigated automated parking enforcement, and then through the policy and ordinance evaluation to reevaluate the 85th percentile methodology for determining speeds, which has been something concern recently because speeds keep increasing, essentially just keep increasing the speed limits. And then create uniformity across municipal and government agencies to streamline the processes and increase collaboration so it makes it easier for those folks to do it. So where we're at right now in this process, like I said, about 10 months, I guess, maybe a little bit less. We've just recently had a countermeasure prioritization workshop with the stakeholders. So we went through some particular areas of concern where we were looking at the crash types and how to quantify them to come up with roadways that would be what we need for the prioritization. And then we're going to be kicking off here in August, later on this summer, public engagement phase 2. So we should have some of those prioritized locations picked out by that point. And then we'll come back to the public to try to get some better concepts and things like that for those locations. And then hopefully by September, it's about 2025, we'll be wrapping things up and ready for plan adoption. Now, I would behoove to not speak on at the same time as we've been doing this. We have a regional safety action plan, which is an update to the 2020 plan that we've done, which covers all 10 counties in our region. So through that regional safety action plan, which has the Vision Zero component as well, that can be used for Safe Streets for All funding. So that should be wrapped up here by June 23rd, I believe, which leaves a very short window, but the next phase of funding for Safe Streets for All is closing on June 26th. So in between that time period, if there's municipalities that are looking for funding and have applications ready to go, that document would support them through that funding as well. So that's all I have. So if there's any questions, I think I can take them now unless I went too long.
No, you're good. You can take questions now.
Okay. Sure. Eric?
And this being an active transportation meeting, a lot of the data that you have relies on accident reports.
Yeah.
And a lot of pedestrian and bicycle accidents are by their standards not reportable. Are you attempting to improve the reporting for the accidents that are currently non-reportable?
You bring up a very interesting point because that's something that, I guess maybe naively, I believe that crash report data with all the crashes that were occurring. We got into a conversation with Mavis Rainey from Oakland TMA. And she brought up, whether or not pedestrians with mobility devices were being recorded in there or not. So which
Inoperable bicycles are inoperable vehicles, but nobody calls tow truck.
Yeah.
Until they come into
Yeah.
threshold.
Yes. And that's one of those things too, where a lot of times those, we're relying on the fact that there's going to be an injury in a crash like that because that's a vulnerable road user, and hopefully there's not. But by the data that we have, most times that are, and we're hoping that those are reported. Now, like I said, I did a Google search and came up with multiple newspaper articles citing that there were pedestrians that were hit at crosswalks in Oakland, and the drivers were tried. And whenever I went back to crash data, there was no record of those crashes even occurring with crash data, which is really troubling to me because it's like you said, they're vulnerable road users and they're not even being represented in the data for what they are. So how does that It's kind of like they're being forgotten about. Which goes back into what you're talking about as well. We had a pedestrian and bike safety audit in Vandergrift recently. And they mentioned that there were pedestrian crashes, but they didn't have the crash date, and they weren't represented in the Pennsylvania crash date because they weren't turned in. And it's like, well, wait a minute, how do we get a different perspective from the locals as we're getting from the actual state issued crash data? So it really leaves, room for investigation, which is troubling for me because I would say you would be getting all that stuff. So then
I have a second question, which is about technology solutions. I have observed empirically and also by actually going and chasing it down that Google Maps encourages speeding.
yeah,
The big observation is they're often optimistic about the time it will take, which means that you plan too little time and you have an incentive to speed up to get to your appointment. But beyond that, I took a look a year or so ago, and there's a stretch of I-70, 79. There's a stretch of the highway up to Erie that has a uniform speed limit. And Google's estimate of the time that it will take you to traverse that requires you to, on average, exceed the speed limit. Is there a way that the traffic safety people can get together with Google so that rather than just asking how fast is the traffic moving, they ask what is the minimum of the speed limit and how fast the traffic is moving, and they did a stop.
yeah.
That's a point of leverage because there's only a small number of mapping services, and if you can get to them, that will affect a very large number of people.
Yeah, I know that's one thing through the traffic incident management program that we've tried to get because of the fact that they are getting a lot of those incidents before the actual traffic and centers lane that there's hosts. So we've worked together a little bit with them. Some of the mapping firms like Waze and things like that are obviously connected back to Apple Maps and Google. Right. But I'm not 100% sure how to get through to it. That's what will be. I agree with you. I know that's been talked about before.
Your recommendations that would audit.
That sounds good.
Well, before we end with you, do other people know of a better way for him to get pedestrian and bike safety?
You go and you access aggregated data through the healthcare systems, emergency departments, treatments.
Yeah.
As you approach them, you
Yes.
and what do you respond to?
Yeah, we've tried and we haven't gotten any response. And a lot of the stuff is kind of like it all falls back on HIPAA protection, and you're trying to, like you said, aggregated data that's at a level that's not necessarily humanized, right? But it's still been iffy. It's one of those things too. I've reached out to UK Light to try to get like an asset management plan that they have for their street lights, because we found some of these accidents are correlating with it just for their bad lights, or lights that are high because they're maintained. And that's like people don't know who you can't get to one person. It's really weird. So,
And I had a question about the next involvement sessions.
yes.
Is it focused, you said, on priority projects? Or are you going to be going to that community with those projects and kind of focus more on recommendations?
Yeah, I think that's the goal. There are going to be 10 locations selected that they're going to have like a sketch up of a design. I'm not sure if that's what's going to happen in this next round, or if that's going to be later down the road. If we're going to go to those 10 like areas, municipalities, or wherever they might be, or if that'll be for further down the road. The idea was to have some, to kind of coordinate with some other events, pop-up events, things like that. PRT has a big outreach push this summer. So I think that was kind of what the plan was.
My question deals with traffic calming and emergency vehicles. A lot of the pushback that occurs when traffic calming ideas come forward is I can't get my fire trucks through. And that has a lot of weight in policymakers' decision. Yet there are communities across the nation and around the world that have small fire trucks and make it happen and do it quite well and have tall buildings. Are there attempts, or is there consideration for education, reach out to firefighting associations, policymakers, of bringing in people who use small emergency vehicles and how they make it work in their community. Just an idea to consider.
Yeah, it would definitely be a good idea. And I think, as you have more and more of these players implement in places, one of the things that's going to go along with it more so than the education point to them is just enforcement. Seen it 100 times where you make the roads more narrow, you allow on-street parking, you get those people park all the way up to the curb line or to the edge of that intersection. Now those trucks can't make that turn. So it's like you can build it, but if you don't enforce it, you're going to build yourself into the same problem that you had before. So, okay, thank you. Sure.
All right, go ahead, Eric.
Thanks, Mary, for bringing that up. I was also going to bring something similar up and definitely want to challenge us to figure out that.
Yeah, there's what it is there.
I mean, I hear about a lot of bike crashes in general, and you can pretty much assume that unless an ambulance is called or someone leaves an ambulance, that there's not going to be a crash report. The police won't take reports. I've talked to people who literally are arguing, waiting for them to give them a police report so that they can, have it for their insurance and all the things that they need it for. And their bike is destroyed or they have a big cut. And, I don't know the answer to that, but maybe that's something that could go into this as in education or policy of making sure that the police themselves are educated on what they need to be doing.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair, we've heard now with the city, not responding to everything unless there's an urgency or, how much of it is taken seriously and how much of it is just. So, yeah, it would be good to have. And I think, through the, I'm sure the fellow AI, it's really interesting to hear that there's some background studies going on about, your missed data and something that we've never had to. So being able to look at some of those photos that have, maybe close passes with high speed and, a couple near misses, try to focus on something.
All right, great. One more question.
Yeah, great. Actually, I have two, but they're real short. One is, are you focused on just county roads, parts, or can it be any road?
Yeah, any road in Allegheny County. So that's 3 different ownerships. Generally, it would be Allegheny County owned roads, City of Pittsburgh owned roads, and then add others.
Yeah, speaking of PennDOT, is there anything you can do to help push PennDOT maybe through the comprehensive plan to make vulnerable road user protection a default for state roads and state designs?
So they do that a lot through their betterment projects whenever they have low cost safety measures and things like that. So through,
I don't see it.
okay. Well, SPC's done 50 road safety audits, and through those road safety audits, we'll suggest, low cost safety countermeasures. Generally, more recently with the PennDOT districts, the engineers have implemented some of those whenever they have those betterment projects because they're low cost. It can generally, line item for a couple $1,000s.
Well, I'm kind of speaking of, when they repave a road or rebuild a bridge, that they have a place for pedestrians in particular.
Yeah.
In this state, it's terrible.
So, and I think that's part of the misunderstanding that if they build that, then the municipality is responsible to maintain it. And there's a lot of municipalities that don't want to take that on. I mean, we've seen that with.
So that's a lack of commitment to vulnerable road users.
Yep. So, I think that's one of those things, though, when you are a municipality and you're trying to offset, the cost of something and maybe you do a pedestrian count, but there's 4 pedestrians that use it. It's like all this stuff. It's a cost benefit, right? Sure. You don't want to invest $2.5 million to put in a roundabout if there's no crashes at a location. So you kind of get back to if you nip the bud before it happens, then you might have a lot of people complaining about having to slow down. But at the same time, you're eliminating crashes. So the cost over time is going down.
All right. Any other questions for Evan? All right, hearing none. Thanks so much for presenting, Evan. That's very informative. Appreciate you giving us an update on that. And then we'll move on to the next topic on the agenda, which is Complete Streets by Peter Quintanilla.
Well done.
Right.
So I'm the PDF.
Okay.
So good morning, everyone. I hope everybody can you hear me okay back there?
Perfect.
Thanks, Jack. My name is Peter Quintanilla. I lead the Design Hub, which is a small piece within Michael Baker. As you know, Michael Baker is a big engineering company. I've been around for 80 years. But with the design hub, what we do, what we specialize is in anything to do with working with communities specifically, but also making things work in terms of Complete Street as an example is one of those things. Yeah. Does it go into full? I think it's the bottom button on the right. Yeah, someone. Oh, geez. Okay, never mind. Press it again. Okay, that's perfect. So anyway, next slide. So one of the things that we do when it is working with communities is that we don't look at things, specifically into like a small little box. We always think that everything's actually interconnected, just like in Complete Street. It is something, or any street for that matter, And so we look at it from the holistic perspective that, a street itself is a public space that actually is shared by everybody. But also the jobs that a street historically has always had, and it should continue having. Next slide, please. So, I started looking at, what is a complete street? And I'm also part of the Smart Growth America Complete Street Coalition. I'm currently a board member, and with Smart Growth America, obviously, we look at things having to do with curb to curb, obviously the sidewalk, bike lanes, bus systems, and all that, and make sure that everything has a place and a space for everything to happen and work great. Next slide. But then I found this really great slide from the city of Salt Lake City that actually takes it down one more step, which is about lighting and about landscaping. And if you think about it, whenever you try to make a complete street, it should not be just about the fact that we have bike lane. It should actually be inviting enough for people to want to ride the bike. It should not be just about the fact that there are sidewalks. It should be made so that people feel safe and comfortable to walking on the sidewalk, right? So it's not just creating the infrastructure. It should be more than that. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that we have been working on is this. It's the idea that fatality happen whenever cars go faster. That's actually a well-known fact. This is actually from the National Traffic Safety Board, but it's also in the Smart Growth America Complete Street website. So you guys are welcome to go and see that. But there's a lot of information about what happens when people get hit by cars. And the funny thing is that a lot of places, like for example, Route 65, people think that Route 65 is a boulevard. And so it should be a boulevard, like people should be able to walk it. You have a lot of communities like on 65 that you have sidewalk next to cars driving at 45 miles per hour. Well, at 40 miles per hour, somebody get hit by a car, it's 85% chance that there's a fatality, So anything on Route 65, for example, hitting 45 plus, it's more than likely going to be a fatality. I mean, let's be honest, nobody drives at 40 miles per hour in 65. I'm just saying, right? Next slide, please. But the one thing that I do want to say is, Mary, of course, you probably know this street all too well, but this is actually my neighborhood in Squirrel Hill. And I was I wasn't driving. I was on the driver's seat, but I was fully stopped. Don't tell anybody. But here's the thing. This is a proven fact. If you're a driver, the speed equals to what is it you're focusing on and you're paying attention to. Next slide, please. So if you're sitting there in the car at the moment and you're looking around and you're driving at 25 miles per hour, this is your code of vision that you're looking at. It's a pretty wide code of vision. 25 miles per hour, which, by the way, on Main Street should not be 25 miles per hour. Let's just be honest about that. Next slide. But if you go at 35 miles per hour, that actually decreases to just pretty much that box. You're basically focusing on the car in front of you, making sure that you're not going to slow down. You have to slow down when the car slows down. The car's going to make a left turn. You're going to veer over to the right. All the stuff that happens, So this is basic human reaction psychology, and the fact that our eyesight, could withstand that much information on only that little box. Next slide, please. But if you're on the Main Street, for example, you have so many other things that are playing a factor into things that a driver should look at. Number one, the car in front of you. But you know what? Also the pedestrian on the sidewalk. Also the door of the cars that are parallel parked, if they're going to open or not. If there's going to be a kid running out of the store because the one didn't give him candy. Next slide. And then, of course, all the doors that happen on that Main Street. So this is one of the things that there have been so many studies done that road and Main Street that have a lot of this issues of problems with things that actually can include into the driver's field of view end up causing the drivers to slow down. So meaning that the more of this happens, the more drivers
feel compelled to slow down. But this is only part of the problem, part of the design, because the other design is actually the street design. Forget the signage. Most drivers are looking at the corner view, not at signage all the way through. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah. So what about complete street? So if you think about it, if you think about this holistic idea concept of issues and problems that you have in the street, but also the fact that streets need to be a social place for people to interact, and again, I have been living in Scroll for 6 years, and I love the fact that every time I walk up and down the sidewalk, I meet a whole bunch of people there all the time, It actually creates health because people end up walking more rather than just, being in a car all the time. It helps the environment because get people out of the car, but at the same time, it's actually socialized. But more importantly, it actually creates that economic vitality. Pittsburgh was a city of 80, 90, 85, 90 neighborhoods. I forget what the exact number is. And each one of those had their own little main street. Each one of them had their own little heart. Each one of them had their own little economic vitality that people used to work there and walk to home from there. So those are all the things that a street should be, a complete street should be. Next slide. So meaning that a way that we should look at street is that it's not just as a complete street. It's that it's not just about what we call the streetscape, which a streetscape is actually, the sidewalk, the curb, the parking. If there's parking on the street, the lanes and the bus and the bike and all the stuff. But it actually should be that streetscape plus the land use. And the land use is actually the ground floor of the buildings next to the street. And I will show you what I mean in a minute. But more importantly, it's also the economy that comes as a second layer to this whole entire mess. Next slide, please. And so, this aspiration of a main street, this is actually from the NACTO book. And this is a perfect example of what a main street would actually like to aspire. It's like a street that has so much of everything, that people could go in here every single day and something new is happening, right? Like every day you walk in there, there's like a new food vendor or a new food truck, or like you met Joey or you met Mary that you haven't seen for so long, those kind of stuff. And then you have the buses. So you're able to go on the buses. Also, you have the bike lanes. Next slide, please. But here's a thing where we always fall short is that a main street, complete street, is, as you see there, the streetscape actually is composed of, I believe, of lighting, the landscape, the parking, bike lane, sidewalks, and the bus lanes, and of course, the roads, right? I mean, that is what normally we think of a complete street. But my point is this, and the way we look at it, and Michael Baker, is that is a portion of it. Because what plays a bigger role is the land use, like I was saying. All the buildings along the edges play a role. If you have commercial, you're going to have more doors. You're going to need actual on-street parking, meaning that's actually going to slow down traffic, That all helps out with the economy, and of course, that helps out with the social infrastructure of the whole neighborhood. Next slide, please. This is a really cool transit that we drew up, and and one of the things that we like to do with the transit is because it's a really good, clean way to organize a city or a town or any borough, based on the density or less dense. And so, if you look at on the right hand side, you could actually have, like a Wolfner. Or a Fußgängerzone like we have in Germany, which are roadways that pedestrians and bicycle and cars and motorcycle and dogs and horses, they're all kind of intermingling, but everybody's going at such a slow speed that it's fine and it works. Once you start hitting 15 miles per hour, you start to separating some of those uses. But if you notice that even the bike lanes, you could have a bike lane that is part of a sidewalk, it's a protected bike lane, or it could actually be a meandering sidewalk, meandering trail, all depending on where you are within the whole transit urbanism of your city, Next slide, please. So, but not every street, of course, can have a complete street, not all the layers. And we know that very well because, next slide, because one example that I'll always like to point out is one of the street here in my neighborhood is Squirrel Hill again. This is Shady and Forbes, and it is a very tight street. You have a lot of pedestrians, you have a lot of people walking and crossing and things, but you could integrate a lot of these layers of complete street to make it safer for everybody. Next slide. So number one is, think of things as layers. So the sidewalk is not just a sidewalk that's supposed to go around each one of the blocks. It actually, how is it that each one of the sidewalks should connect? And the fact that crosswalks are part of the sidewalk, because that is how people walk from one island to the other. So in this case, I'm highlighting two intersections. One of them is Shady and Forbes. And in that one is actually the one that we have, the scramble intersection. So all the cars stop, everybody goes crazy, they go across wherever they want. It could really well be one of those streets that could potentially even be race intersection, because that way just priority is pedestrian in that case. But what's important when you have a priority intersection like this is to have another intersection before it that actually tells drivers, hey, slow down, you're about to come to a priority intersection where pedestrians are at. Because that's the other problem with Complete Street that we have at the moment, that they say Complete Street is this road, but then every street before it, you're driving at 45 miles per hour, then they expect you like in the last 5 minutes to slow down to 15 because you're entering a Complete Street where you have the bike and the walking and all that, So in this case, the idea of creating bump outs like on Marlboro and Shady would be a really good one because it slows down traffic before they get to Forbes. So one street before, this is where that relationship should start happening. Next slide. Of course, integrating of bike lanes. Now, I know, I forget your name, but you're going to probably correct me for this one. But, the idea with integrating of bike lanes in different places is cool, but also there are other places that maybe there's not enough room for a bike lane. So that is the point that, like in this case, Forbes, there's not enough width. So you ask the pedestrian, the bicyclist to either go on the street as a sharer or to get off the bike and actually walk in the sidewalk with everybody else, because it is a more urban condition. And as you notice along Shady, the idea is, yes, you could have bike lanes there because it's actually not as urban as Forbes. Next slide, please. And of course, creating of that the other layer, which is the landscape, the natural layer. We always forget about the landscape and the natural layer and the fact that it's not just about putting green stuff on our road, but it's actually that green stuff that relates to the green stuff that's around it. So that way birds and other animals are able to go from one tree to the other and they have a relationship. They have that other layer that they could actually enjoy and are part of. Next slide, please. And of course, finally is the street. And the streets are actually respond to a lot of those other layers because the streets are about the cars. Cars don't mind. I mean, a driver, it's okay for a driver to spend an extra 30 seconds to go around the block. But the 30 seconds for a pedestrian is actually probably could be either, 100 feet, 10 feet, or it could be 5 feet if you have, some sort of, if you're handicapped on a wheelchair, I saw a gentleman trying to cross Shady and Forbes the other day on a wheelchair. And as he was crossing, because there's a bump, he hit the bump and he dropped his cell phone. So he had to get off his wheelchair to grab the cell phone, go back in his wheelchair, keep on crossing, So that ended up being a lot longer than just the 10 seconds that people really. Next slide, please. So again, just to recap, the idea of a street or complete street, it actually it's the most enduring urban form. I mean, the roadways in Rome were designed in the first, and then the connections and there's the section of a lot of this roadway was where most of the towns were built. They have always been a space for everybody, and created equally, but also created so that there's a balance of the uses, right? Which is important to do. They have always helped to shape the economy and social vitality of our place, reflect the local history and identity. Again, my neighborhood, we have a whole bunch of squirrels as bike rack. There you go. And then central to environmental sustainability because, meaning the more people that actually walk to their places, the less likely they are to get on a car. And obviously that's the one thing that we want. So with that, that was pretty much my presentation. Hopefully it didn't go off more than 10 minutes.
No, you're great. That was excellent, Peter. Thank you. So, always appreciate having your expertise. Thanks at these forums. Anyone have any questions for Peter? All right.
Are there any good examples of raised intersections that are local here?
Mike, I don't think we've done it. They did them on Lionel Street in Hazelwood Green. That's probably our first one that I can think of. We're about to put out to bid this year. The second phase of Penn Ave reconstruction, which will have a raised intersection in Pacific. Bakery Square has one.
On the next one?
Yeah, whatever that street.
It's probably Internet Street.
It's like red.
Yeah. But in terms of low draft.
Oh, Mayor Street.
I don't know. I think Lidl's. Yeah, we don't have any Penn's going to be like the main first one with like transit,
My business district. Is that working well with slow traffic?
There isn't a ton of traffic on it, place, but yeah, I mean, it creates like a sense of space, sense of place, which is really nice.
It's a very, I mean, yeah, it's a very comfortable street to be walking and biking on. But yeah, it's really only the users of the build that are using the street.
But when it comes to the race intersection, the idea is that, you know, you have the 6-inch curb in theory, right? Because Pittsburgh, we don't like have 6-inch curbs, but you know, you have the 6-inch curb, and then as you get to the intersection, the street actually goes up 6 inches, you know? So it's not like in Bakery Square that actually it's all just a flush with the street. You know, literally you have a bump, not a bump, but you have a ramp that goes up to the 6 inches. And then at that point, the cars and the pedestrians are at the same level. And then just like the data and the example he's talking about, they have some sort of stamped concrete or something else so that cars not only see it visually and feel it as they're entering, but also it's the tactile feel that they're like, we are entering a different zone. So it's a lot of those tiny little details that are very, very important and critical to make it work.
We have a couple raised crosswalks that we've done too that aren't quite the whole intersection. But I think the same treatment that you're talking about, we did one on Ross Street by the Mellon building that has like raised, it's concrete, it's got right down concrete look on it. I think that was quite successful. I always see a lot of people crossing it.
Those all local streets or any of those state PennDOT roads?
At this point, all streets. Penn is going through the PennDOT process, like it's FHWA funds, so we do have PennDOT oversight for that project. But that's not a state route. To my knowledge, I don't think any state routes at this point.
Peter, besides the SS4A stuff, is there any opportunities? It's one of those things that I think is weird because we present all this stuff that's like, you know, it's all federal documented. These are great practices, but yet at the local level, how do people get funding for this kind of stuff?
Well, SS4A has been one that has been actually successful. Like you mentioned, you know, there's a closing deadline looming very, very soon, and there's still money there. And I know that because Smart Growth America has helped a lot of municipalities go after money successfly. But then there are also other type of money that go through that I could probably get you a list. I don't know exactly of the sources. Mike, do you know of any of them? But I know that has some local state ones.
Yeah, I know that like SBC has competitive funding programs. Like it's like the Harley stock, you know, like the transportation funds and things like that. But it's just weird that, you know, it's like, it's always, we're looking at the federal side and saying, there's all this great stuff you should implement. And it's like, well, how are we going to do it? Because like the landscaping is a maintenance thing. The lighting is a maintenance thing. It's all maintenance stuff. And it's like, hey, municipality, it would be great if you could do this, but there's going to be a giant bill in the city.
Yeah.
So,
And so,
I was going to say, working on these projects, you know, working through the PennDOT process with the federal funds, like, I totally agree with everything that Peter has said about it's not just the roadway, it is all the uses adjacent. So like for two of my projects right now, one of the biggest hurdles is we're doing complete street reconstructions, including sidewalk. And obviously the sidewalk is not just a straight line, right? Where you're in an urban area, it goes in and out. There's buildings have little window wells that, you know, and the process to get approvals to work on those portions of the sidewalk that are in private property technically, but function as a public space, cause so just budget schedule, they're like just killers. So like, it's something that we're going to have to overcome moving forward to continue to do like complete streetscaping projects effectively, because it just drags and drags and drags, and there's just not a lot of flexibility.
I know talking to Ernie, like there was some stuff that was, you know, like trying to get the planning side of it. So when a new development comes in, have them build out, you know, things that match what you want them, you know, what you want the corridor to look like.
Yeah, like
So I guess that's the hope at least.
And this is why we've been pushing complete streets policy.
Yeah, exactly.
Go on, you know, and like all that Penn Circle stuff that, you know, looks fantastic, wouldn't have happened, you know, if it wasn't sort of in like happening when they were rebuilding
Building it in, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think, Jack, did you have a question? And then we'll go to you, Mayor.
Is there a speed limit at which you are a range where you want to have one of these raised intersections? Like it probably wouldn't work where you can go 55 mile an hour, but it'll work up to maybe 35 or 40. Is there a range that you try to
So what happens with anything that, if there's a roadway and there's any kind of raise that goes up, depending on the car, which that's a very good question, because depending on the speed that the car is driving, the car actually could just go up slowly or hit it hard or actually fly off like a rocket, and there have been cases where cars have hit the curb and end up flying off into like a building, and if there's a person sitting there, they could hit the person from the waist up. I mean, so it is a problem, right? So a lot of these raised intersections, they work best at the slowest speed. So like 25, lower than 25, I would say. And also that, and again, Mike, you could probably tell me, but it's also the sloping, the ramping up to the 6 inches, how long that ramping is. That would also help the cars to be able to maneuver that without an issue. But, if you have a really good, 10 or 20 foot ramping up to the 6 inches, it is a very gradual, but still the change of texture makes it apparent that you're in a different place.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
One more layer of complexity to the streetscaping. The Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition has been trying to get street trees in Squirrel Hill. And apparently, I'm not directly involved in that, but the reports that I get to the tree people are that the city would be happy to put the trees in, but you need the permission of the adjacent store. And most of the adjacent stores are actually rented, and the landowner is sort of distant from the whole affair. So there's another layer of permissions and agreements that enters into this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so one example actually I was going to talk about earlier today was Gardena in California. That's a project that we're working with their Main Street. And in that case, it was all the shop owners, that are working with the city to get the money to implement a lot of the redesigning that we're talking about, the color of the facade, but also trees. And the thing about trees is that is very important is that trees actually make a sidewalk welcoming, but at the same time, you want to make sure that it clears at least 9 feet. So the bottom of the branches need to clear off 9 feet. And that's because that is the space that you can see across the street into like whatever's happening on the other sidewalk. What happens now is because the cheapest things are like the, $3.99 tree from Home Depot that are like, 2 feet tall. It'll take forever for them to grow. And of course you need a bigger, bush in order for them to, grow to the proper height.
And
So-
the height is capped because of power lines.
Right. But as long as the bottom of the tree or the canopy actually is 9 feet, then shops are perfectly fine.
Great. One more question, Zach.
Yeah, the kind of touching on the slope and everything, because we are in Western PA and we have snow in the winter, is there any issues with maintenance as far as snow removal, or do the raised roads get damaged quicker, anything like that?
No, not at all, because most of the time it's concrete. So actually it will serve better than asphalt would. You want to make it out of concrete because you do want to slope it up, and then you want to do the stamp pattern on it. And here's a funny thing is that a lot of all these things that I'm talking about are things that if you jump on a plane and go to Europe, you're going to see it. And guess what? They also have snow. They have ice. They have worse conditions than we have. I mean, they're like higher latitude than we are here in Pittsburgh, and has been working incredibly well for many years, including the usage of asphalt and sidewalk, because actually it's smoother, it's cleaner, it's safer for people, and they're able to clean it up without a problem. So yeah, it works.
Cool, thank you. I feel like though we've built ourselves into this industrial situation, right? So that's why we were overbuilt. So it's a lot more difficult in Europe to go from, building that originally. We built bridges that are 4 lanes wide that have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit because there were heavy trucks using that, consistently for 30 years, and then the volume fell out. So we're still stuck dealing with that, and that's, I think, where the money problem comes from. If we were built that way earlier, it would be easy to just have a lot of this stuff implemented by now.
Yeah, and I think what I found is, especially talking to people, like one of my projects at the moment is we're looking at redoing Lincoln Square in Gettysburg. And so I am trying to remove the on-street parking in the square and the extra travel lanes and everything else. And I'm telling the case for like, this is going to be great. You're going to increase 40% of each one of the quadrants for outdoor dining or pedestrian or tour guides that people come over here. And one of the first questions was, well, what about the trucks? Are they going to be able to make a right turn? We keep designing our streets and our sidewalk for that 1% of the time that there's going to be a truck on the roadway, but not the 99% of the time that could potentially be more people walking around the street, right? And so we keep going in that same pattern or mentality. And that's the reason why we get stuck with overbuilding, over designing stuff that are just causing problems.
And I think to your point, like, or to a combination of these 2 points, like, if you think about land use being a huge portion of it, the places where people historically lived were built in a walkable way that are hard for those trucks and things to make turns. And I think as sprawl has gone out and filled out those kind of interstitial places between the urban areas, that's where you get like most of these issues. Because the city, we don't have that many streets that are, hugely overbuilt. And because when you're saying, I was like, really? That's, oh yeah, you're the whole region.
Yeah.
So I think, land use is like a huge piece of it.
Well, I think it gets back to the same thing, right? Like you're blocked off by a railroad, you're blocked off by an interstate, you're blocked off by, you weren't necessarily, that road was built there and it cut you off from what other access you had to some of those smaller town areas and things like that. So it gets back into the problem of, like trying to create points for people to cross some of these areas to, make things more accessible for people.
All right. A question online, yes.
Yes, thank you, Leanne. Made a comment there about we're building roads for 1% of the road users, or what, for 1% of the time. Just an observation or a comment or thought. What's driving those decisions that we're building roads for 1%, and how can we all speak better to the audience, that decision maker that's driving that sort of infrastructure, and whomever that may be? How do we identify who those decision makers are? Might be the other question that's driving us to create infrastructure for the 1% of the users most prevalently.
Yeah, well, I actually want to say 1%, obviously, I just made up a number, right? Saying that, most of the time, our roadways are used by cars and pedestrians, but yet we're always concerned about the turning radius of an 18-wheeler, for example, And I think part of the problem is because we always design it and look at the lowest common denominator in terms of like the worst driver. But actually a really good professional driver will be able to make turn appropriately. And so we kind of have to look into that. And I think part of the conversation is just to like literally look at, right now we have a software called radius turning, auto turn, which literally could track where a truck would make a right turn, and how much space it needs. But it would do it depending on the speed that you set it up, because a 18 miles per hour truck making a right turn is going to need more space than a 5 miles per hour truck making a right turn, right? And so that's one of the conversations that we need to have and show that you could actually go slower, make the right turn, so that fuel usage of a truck making the right turn does not over design the intersection that most of the time is used for pedestrians. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there's a freight committee at SPC too. Is there cross discussion here between pedestrian users and freight users?
Looking at monthly and
Thanks for looking this way.
I would say generally I would risk, because we do tend to overlap and integrate all teams here at SPC.
Yeah, but I don't know that specific conversation is taking place with regularity, and it shouldn't be.
Good point, John.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Thank you. That's just, it's these decision makers, somehow we have to reach out to them in language that they understand or respect. And, for them, it might be an issue of liability. How do they lower their liability? Now, everything often comes down to economics. So just wanted to add that.
All right. Thanks, John. All right. With that, we're going to end the Complete Streets discussion and move into our next presentation. That was a nice preface for it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to turn it over to Trajan Jones from Indiana Borough, their sidewalk barrier.
Hello, everybody. My name is Trajan Jones. We're trying to do it off of the screen so I can address most of you. So I'm with Indiana Borough. I'm the planning and zoning official. And we'll get it going. Let's go right into the first one. All right, so my goal this morning is to just simply summarize briefly our sidewalk assistance program, highlight a couple of the benefits, barriers, and participation that we've seen up to this point. Next slide, please. So to give you some background, Indiana Borough is the county seat for Indiana County. You have an approximate population of about 14,000, and that would also include students from IUP when they're in session. When they're not in session, it's closer to about 8,000 to 9,000. We're a semi-urban college town, and we are considered very walkable with a walk score of about 78. Next slide. So the program overview, it is administrated through our code and zoning department, and it is an offshoot from our tree removal assistance program. So you can imagine we're talking about street trees. After 15, 20 years, the roots start expanding underneath the sidewalk, pushing those up, creating different hazards. So as a response to our community, we said, we want to address that. We don't want to just help you remove the tree and then leave you there with the sidewalk. We also want to go that next step and try to give you some funds to address that as well. The program, it was funded through the 2021 American Rescue Plan Act, and the aid amount for each participant or resident is determined based on the sidewalk condition. Now, the first pot of money that we had from that ARPA fund, it was limited. So we went off of a first come, first served basis, and any identified infractions were required to be corrected once identified. So we definitely had to think about communication with our residents once we started to get to a low or lower amount of money. We definitely didn't want to have them apply for it. We go out, we look into it, and then they're on the hook and we don't have the money to give back to them. That would be complete antithesis of what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. So how the program is structured, the eligibility, pretty much any borough resident, but it's really based off the code's review of the sidewalk condition. So if your sidewalk's really not in terrible shape, you weren't going to be eligible. And those are the standards off there to the right that were used to determine whether a project or a sidewalk would be eligible for this money. Now, for each participant, they had an option. So if the pad or the sidewalk, one of them wasn't too bad, you have the option to repair it for a flat fee of $50 per pad. If it was in worse shape and you were looking for a replacement, our council came to the determination that it would be $7.50 per square foot for the replacement. There were not really any special accommodations. One that I kind of thought may fit would be there was no cost for the permit for the applicant after that. So if you're in the, like I said, you wanted to participate in the program, you essentially got the permit for free. So for the application and approval process, I pulled in one of our code officers. I asked them, walk me through the process from the time that somebody comes in the door to we're taking them out. It was a lot more steps than this, but it boiled down to these kind of 7 steps. So somebody would come in with a complete application. We would do a code review and verification of the sidewalk standards. That was the slide before those standards. After that, we would measure the individual pads for the square footage being used for replacement. That would get them their total cost is going to come back to them. And then we see here the square footage multiplied by the cost per square foot, like I said, set by council. After that, sidewalks were inspected for public sidewalk specifications, which you can see there. So what we're saying there is we can't just come in and throw something in there. It has to be to a certain standard. Next thing would be the final inspection upon pouring of the material. And then finally, we get the approval of the final cost from our building code official and send the reimbursement out to the community residents. Community impact. Our first permit was issued about a year ago, May 19th, 2023. And since then, we've seen over 17,000 square foot of sidewalk be replaced. Total repairs, 76, and for a total culmination of about 55 projects. Now, these numbers are interesting, but I don't think they necessarily capture the real community impact. And you can kind of see the picture. Oh, sorry. No, you're good. You can kind of see the pictures over here. So the bottom one was from, I believe, 2018. The top one was from 2023. So this was one of our first projects. So you can see a lot of the times these projects weren't just looking at the sidewalks. There was also other pedestrian infrastructure aspects that also went into it. And this one, you can see the bulb outs for wheelchairs to another intersection. The do not enter sign. And I just went through this intersection last night and I realized they had also placed the pedestrian electric signs to show you when to walk and when to stop. So from where this intersection went to where it is now, just based off of the spark that this provided, I think that captures a little bit of the community impact a little bit better. So we weren't just looking for sidewalks. We're looking for that to be more of a spark for more pedestrian oriented infrastructure. And then even beyond that, just the sense from the community of being responsive, like I said, sidewalks in the right of way, that's the community's responsibility. So snow removal, repairs, that's all on them. So being responsive to that, understanding that that could put a lot of them into a struggle or into a tough position. Like I said, being responsive and showing that we want to help you with this. We don't want to just say, you do this and we'll do everything else. We want to help you improve this area. Next slide. So finally, our lessons learned. Like I said, we had our one pot of money, and then we just recently got awarded another one. I forget specifically where the funding is coming from, but I know it's around $400,000, which our original one was $200,000. So we essentially doubled our pot of money from the first round. And like I said, some of the lessons that we wanted to learn to apply to this next pot of money is operating some type of tiered reimbursement system based on income to improve some equitability. So like we said, the way we did it the first time around, it was the one flat rate for pads or the $750 for repairs, and that applied to everybody across the board. So what we're looking to do now is I don't know exactly how it would look, but like I said, tier based off of income. So if you're not making X amount of money, we're going to give you extra assistance so that everybody has an opportunity to utilize this program. The next one would be clear and concise review standards, allows for consistent enforcement. That's a big one between the standards for what creates you or makes you eligible for the program, and then also the standards of how the sidewalk needs to be built afterwards. I think we have a pretty good process right now, but it can always be improved. We need more people to participate. We want it to be as clear as possible. We don't want them to have any type of struggles or anything to worry about, aside from just simply getting the sidewalk done. And the last one kind of goes off of that as well. We want to streamline the application process to allow for greater community participation. Currently, we have one code official this is his sole job, well, not his sole job, but he's the only one that's taking in the permits, going out, doing the review. So whether it would be bringing in another person, expanding in-house, allowing, like I said, we do a lot of work with IUP. So having students maybe take on a portion of this as some type of project. Different ways that we thought about expanding it, but just something to streamline the process and make it all happen a little bit quicker. And that is it. Does anybody have any questions? Sorry.
You mentioned a potential tiered reimbursement system based on income. How are you addressing rental properties in that regard?
That's a good question. So I guess the best way to answer that would be really the same. So rental properties, it wouldn't be the renter's responsibility, I guess, if that answers your question. It would still be the property owner. So they'd be the ones applying for it, going through the whole process. So it really wouldn't fall on the renters in terms of them paying for the improvement. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but could the renter apply?
They could. Yeah, they could. I don't see why not. Typically, we don't see that. I'm not sure why, but yeah. I'm not sure about that. Let me also give everybody a preface too for the questions. I don't personally oversee this program, more the planning side of it. And this is more so through code enforcement, but so I may not have answers to all your questions, but I'll do the best I can.
So
I'll go down this side again.
question, what is the pattern in your municipality? I know in South Oakland, we have huge numbers of absentee landlords who may not even be in the country and who are thoroughly indifferent. And so the people with the interests are the renters. But in your area, you may have local renters renting out a couple of houses where they're really local and they have an interest. And the question is, how does your pattern of ownership and rentership play against the simplicity of the application?
That's a good question. I think it's fairly similar to what you're saying in terms of absentee landlords, although it's been improving a little bit. So being a college town, we have a lot of student rentals. So in the past, that has been a problem in terms of absentee landlords. They just kind of have the place and let the students do whatever, and they're not really concerned about it. Since then, IUP's enrollment has started to fall a little bit. So as a result of that, we see less student rentals around. So I'd say there's more of the renters in our community are more older, kind of more, they're looking to settle. They're not the transient population that it has been. So like I said, the program is looking for renters. We definitely would encourage them to be a part of it, but I think a lot of what maybe their mindset is why would they pay for something that's not technically theirs? Now, granted, it does improve the conditions of it, but like I said, at the end of the lease, they're gone. So in the landlord still, they get to enjoy that benefit forward as long as they own that property.
Right. Go ahead, Molly.
I was wondering, so obviously this is kind of a concern that we're seeing across Pennsylvania with absentee rental, let's see if we want to use that term. Have you captured how many projects have been funded without the tiered income system that maybe highlight the projects that happened because you had these landlords who aren't necessarily going to qualify as low income because it's a business, but maybe without this program wouldn't have bothered it with improving the property, and not necessarily just absentee landlords, but potential businesses, what other people do wouldn't be classified as low income, but maybe were reluctant to update their sidewalk without this program.
No, yeah, I think that would be something that we're definitely interested in doing going forward. Like you said, we're trying to expand this, so we definitely want to do that in the best way possible. But to this point, I would say no, we haven't really looked at anything like that. Really up to this point, given Indiana Borough and our resources in terms of staff, we were really just looking to get the project stood up. Like I said, we've been operating for about a year. So I think now that we have it to a place where it is kind of established, community knows about it. Like I said, we've done a handful of projects already. I think now we can start to look at more of the data and allow that to influence the growth of it. Whereas like I said in the past, it's just been kind of waiting it essentially.
Yeah, I think that it's a great idea to also have it based off of like income eligibility, but also it does serve as a really good incentive program for those properties that are a little bit more reluctant to invest.
Right.
Thank you.
Jack.
How does prevailing wages fit in? For instance, the municipality decides to put in a sidewalk. We have to pay prevailing wages. So do you pay directly to the business or the homeowner, and they pay the contractor to prevent municipality from making and hire somebody?
Correct. Yeah. From how I understand it, that's how it's operated. Like I said, it's more of a reimbursement than a upfront cost that we pay to them. So the homeowner, they pay for it all up front and then reimburse it up to X%. So I'd say that's how we've kind of avoided it in the past. But to be fair, I don't have a whole lot of information or background on that.
All right. Any other questions in the room for Trajan? Online?
Hey, this is Seth Bush with Bike Pittsburgh, and I live in Swissvale, Pennsylvania, and have been supporting an active transportation plan here. I know you mentioned you weren't sure exactly where the funding came from, but if that is something that you're able to find out and maybe send along to us or to me, I can put my email in the chat. I'd be really interested in that. We have some interest in the borough here in adopting a similar program if we can find the resources for it. And I bet other municipalities would as well. I know the city of Pittsburgh has something somewhat similar that they've been implementing, but it's challenging for these municipalities outside of the city to get started with something like this unless we can figure out the funding. And really excited to hear your case study here, and might reach out with some questions in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I can share all this information with Leanne and allow her to disseminate it to the rest of the group. But yeah, we'd always be open to answering any questions that any other community may have, to replicate something like this. So yeah, we'd be happy to do that.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks for that presentation, Trajan. A lot of good discussion on that. And we'll move on to our last presentation, which is the City of Pittsburgh Sidewalk Repair Program by Mike Pensini. You can see it. All right. Mike, when you're ready, why don't you fill it against Randy?
Yeah. So I'm going to run through kind of the history and status of our Critical Sidewalk Gaps program, which started around 2021. and our sidewalk repair program, formerly pilot, which I think will tie nicely into what Trajan was talking about, and we might have to talk about it because we are looking to do a similar program to assist homeowners with sidewalk, because obviously after all, the Commonwealth, it's a big issue. So the primary goal of the Critical Sidewalk Gap program, which I and my team oversee, is to develop safe, accessible pedestrian connections to essential community resources, focusing on schools, transit, business districts, and parks. This picture is from one of our projects a couple of years ago. The one on the left is on our Engage page. It's like the banner image of just the sidewalk pads just stop and dump you off into sidewalk. Or to grass, rather. This street goes down to Bexron Road, where there are transit lines. So this was one of our early lines in coordination with kind of desired transit paths. So that's Madeline Street. Thank you. So, there obviously are a lot of sidewalks throughout the city that are in poor condition. We see the 3-to-1 ones. So we kind of have to narrow it down. And, there's obviously only so much funding that we have and capacity for me and my team of two to manage. So the biggest thing I would say that we get asked is like, oh, this pad in front of my house is busted. Can you fix it? And no, we work through city contractors. So typically there needs to be like a certain kind of activation energy, a hump that you have to get over to make the work profitable for them. We can only ask so many favors. We do some small projects, but it is like it's a lot of managing of that relationship with our contractors. So I would say at least a full block of work. We typically try to do longer ones because if the need is there for multiple blocks, obviously that'll make a more compelling project. We look at key connections, kind of from one neighborhood to the other. If there's like a topographic challenge, one neighborhood's on the top of the hill, one's at the bottom. We try to make those connections. Transit is actually probably our number one consideration that we take into account. Community assets, things like senior centers, YMCAs, stuff like that. And schools are a big one. We work a lot with our Safe Routes to School coordinator area to help flag routes. Equity considerations, I think they ran the stats. I think we have over 80% of our projects, maybe more, are in like J40 or other disadvantaged neighborhoods. Obviously the areas that have less resources are the ones that have the greater needs. So, we're working in the areas where there are major issues with the pedestrian network already. It's just the areas that, we tend to focus on just based on the nature of the program. And then things that get flagged to us. So we don't have, and I'll talk about this in the future or later in the presentation, we don't have a citywide sidewalk assessment. We have, I believe, 2 neighborhoods have been looked through, Homewood and Larimer. But aside from that, it is, I and my team really rely on 311, the counselors to identify things and just, things that come up in neighborhood meetings. If we hear about them, we'll jot it down and put it onto our gigantic Excel sheet tracker of such issues. Just give a quick run through. In 2021, I was told you have to spend all this old sidewalk money and figure it out. We were in the middle of COVID. We started working with our Safe Routes to School coordinator and me and one of my staff. And we did 3 projects near schools along Safe Routes to School routes. 2022, we kind of did a little more planning. We worked a bit with council. We got ARP money to do our first big project, which was Irvine Street down in Hazelwood. And then we actually started tracking projects. We started taking all of our, we went through 311 and started just going through, 311 by 311 and just putting them on the tracker just to have something to start with. 2023, I think it kind of started to become a real program that people knew about. We took time before construction season to plan it out. Me and my staff met with one or two of the planners, and we had our big giant tracker, and we were like, what do we do? And so we did obviously these things evolve over the year. We coordinate with utilities or things like that, and projects become higher or lower priority. But we started with an outline and just pushed through. Our sidewalk repair pilot kind of came about that year, and I'll talk about that later. That's the thing that's similar to Trajan's program. And we also started we have an engage page, we have it online. And then 2024, we involved more people with our selection of the projects. We kind of switched how we were looking at our repair pilot. We did our first couple projects with our traffic group and Complete Streets, doing focusing some projects on intersection improvements and traffic safety, traffic calming. And we installed 3 locations that were done with TA set aside funds with PennDOT oversight, which has its own, as I kind of mentioned earlier, has its own level of additional concerns. Just to do a very high level, sidewalks are very flexible and squishy, and projects in and out of what would be considered a critical sidewalk project. So I kind of just went through some of our our invoices and our authorization letters just to see I don't keep good stats until now for this presentation. To try to just get an idea even for us internally, because we do get asked these kind of questions of how much have you done? What are you doing? And again, take these with a grain of salt. These are the ones that I would say are definitely critical sidewalk gap projects. Some are streetscape that we had sidewalk as a portion, some of our sidewalk work were streetscapes that we had sidewalk as a part of it. I kind of didn't include these. These were more of the core critical sidewalk gap projects. So we've been increasing our capabilities year over year and just trying to take money from wherever we can and put it into the program. This is just our projects that we did last year, just to get an idea. We do them all throughout the city. Last year was a big North Side year, but just to get an idea of, we do a good amount of projects in the J40, based on zip codes, and urban census districts. I don't know. And we are trying to focus more and involve our planners more on getting projects within the high injury network as well, and just to get a little more of a data-driven methodology for project selection and implementation. And this is from our Complete Streets Advisory Group presentation, just of what we're looking at for 2025. We have some funds left over from last year, plus a bunch of new money. This year, we're looking to hopefully do 10-ish projects just with city funds. We got 2 DCED grants that we are working on. These are specific projects that were identified by our planning group and given to us for the program. One of the early pictures that I had was our CDBG project that was Hamilton Ave. That's under construction right now. We're open to do 12 to 13 projects, but like I said earlier, it's always changing. We have a monthly utility coordination meeting. We've already had to change, I think, 2 or 3 on, push them to next year, take in new projects, and just kind of adjust those on the fly. Moving forward, this is a big piece of it. Working with city planning and the mayor's office, we are trying to get a better methodology to prioritize projects. So all of the considerations, and more, because I didn't remember them all, but all the considerations that we're using are kind of on the right of this prioritization map. Things like safety, equity, proximity to services, number of 311s. We're trying to, we always redo ADA ramps when they're out of date, but areas where there are concerns with ADA accessibility. So we overlay all these and kind of highlight like where are the core corridors where sidewalks are most needed. And unsurprisingly, they are a lot of the main streets of the city because that's where all the services are. That's where the schools are. That's where all that is. The one big piece that is not fed into this is conditions. Like I said, we only have conditions assessment for 2 of the neighborhoods of the city. And we want conditions to be a major portion of this prioritization. I think out of 100 points, 40 points we reserve for conditions. So I did put in a capital budget request last year for conditions assessment. It didn't get funded. We had a really tight year. I'm going to do it again this year. But in the meantime, we are working with a couple of the nonprofits in the area and city staff to pilot, I guess, a volunteer-led assessment of the sidewalks to try and start feeding that data into our prioritization matrix. That's ongoing. I was gonna say Eric is are you not all familiar with this?
Oh, you're doing great.
Just that definitely is.
No, you're doing great.
And then additionally, moving forward, my dream would be to have, right now we're working with city contractors. Really, it's just one contractor that has our sidewalk repair contract. I would love to build out, and have been kind of pushing this, to build out a dedicated city crew that does this work. When we talk about the pilot, the repair pilot, one of our hurdles, because we're looking at it from a different direction than you guys are, like we're doing it and seeking reimbursement from the property owner rather than the other way around, is one of the big issues is that we are kind of limited to doing long stretches of poor sidewalk at a time. If we had a dedicated city crew, we could be focusing on some of those smaller spot repairs and projects and I think that would give us the flexibility to allow more of a by request sidewalk repair, working with the public to get more sidewalk repaired. City. Additionally, that would make our dollars go farther because obviously we have to pay profit to the contractors and kind of moving toward more affordable repairs for the property owners themselves. So the sidewalk repair program, I'm going to do the same caveat. I don't run it per se. It's kind of been folded into or running parallel with the Critical Sidewalk Gaps program. It's a program mostly in the mayor's office. But what we are looking to do with it is to maintain a high quality sidewalk network while helping cover associated costs. Bless you. It is sometimes it gets confusing because it is kind of run in parallel with the Sidewalk Gaps program, and I'm sure that there will be a bunch of questions. But let me try and work through it, and then I think we could probably have a discussion. So kind of how we work on it is that we will, as Domi, select the projects kind of that we want to do for the year for areas. And I'll say typically at least half of those are areas where there's just no sidewalk at all. And it's like adjacent to a park or like a hillside or something where it's city owned property. So it's not even a problem. It's like kind of our responsibility anyway. But there'll be a couple that are in, like, for instance, we're about to start one on 2nd Ave in Hazelwood, where there are adjacent property owners. Where that is the condition, we'll work with the mayor's office. They will send out a packet in coordination with the finance group to the property owners along that route. It includes the information on the program, as well as an application and a contract. There are a lot of kind of, I guess, legal hurdles that I personally find kind of confusing of how this program works. But the way that our law department has kind of defined it is first, permits, licenses, and inspections, PLI. They assess the corridor and they cite the sidewalks as needed. They're all in pretty bad conditions. They're all like citable sidewalks. property owners can then, they look at the packet, they send back the application. We do the work, and then they get billed. Right now, we do $200 a square yard, which is a little under what we pay per square yard for sidewalk work on a roughly for a typical project. And let's go through the history. In 2023 was when this came up. It was a mayor's office and I believe like town leadership initiative. We had first looked at doing this through the DPW construction division. We did 2 projects that were done fully in-house, but they only have so much capacity to do work. It is a pretty small crew, and it is only one crew, and they have to do, they do all the tread repair. They do all kinds of stuff throughout the city. So it was tough to get into their schedule, and it would be tough to expand. But we did do those 2 projects. In 2024, we were talking with the mayor's office about how to expand our capabilities. We said we're already building whatever, a mile or 2 of sidewalks a year. Do we want to fold this in? And so that's like when the pilot got renewed and kind of re-envisioned to fit in with what we're doing already with the Critical Sidewalk Gaps program, which is probably why it ended up being much more of a we're doing this. It's a thing than an elective thing. And then earlier this year, we adopted it as a full program. It will continue to evolve as we move forward. We're looking to do, I think, maybe 3 or 4, I believe, projects this year under the sidewalk repair program. But we're still kind of working out like how exactly we want it to function. The timeline of like when we send out the letters, how long ahead of time do we have to let people know? It's developing. Yes. So in 2023, we did 2 projects with DPW Construction. They were relatively small, but they were in residential areas. Last year, we kind of fit the program into a couple projects that we were already planning to do. Out of those projects, at this point, I didn't mention that we do discounted rates. So with you guys. Based on income, which I do believe I'll slide in later. At this point, I believe we only had a couple people elect to go into the program. We ended up getting about $13,000 back. The pilot, we had originally used a much lower dollar amount. This year, we're bumping it up to like 200 to better reflect the actual costs. That we incur. In the pilot, there really was no mechanism to follow up on non-responders. And I'll say another issue, which I forget if I noted, was that at this point, we aren't able to cite people or kind of compel them to enter the program to build the sidewalk if there is no existing sidewalk. It has to be existing sidewalk in poor condition, which is a very strange. I don't quite understand it, but that's another hurdle that we're trying to get over that I think would really expand this program a lot, because we are still, most of our Critical Sidewalk Gap projects are still areas that just don't have anything, and we're putting in sidewalk where it never existed. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. So our big challenges that we are looking to work on as we develop this program, just hearing back from property owners. It is similar that it's a lot of renting properties, and the people don't. It's not a lot of owner occupants. Public perception and just the inability to say like I would like to do this portion. That would be my eventual goal, but it's just that we just don't have the capacity to do that at this point. Unable to seek reimbursement. There's no existing sidewalk. Kind of what I said earlier, we do have a lack of conditions data. We are very much reliant on 301s and just things that get flagged to us, which obviously has, like equity considerations of like who has the ability to put it through lots of flag things. Staff time and availability of budget. We typically have to work around the contractor schedule because we're not their only client. And getting things on the schedule and saying, oh, we have a 2-week project to fit into this slide. It's a lot of coordination. Another reason that I'd like to have our own dedicated crew. And then a huge one is getting people to not park on the sidewalk after construction. We work with neighborhood services for pretty much every project to go out before and after and do education on sidewalk parking. We typically do, if possible, raise the sidewalk to our standard 6 or 7 inch height if it can tie into like obviously like stoops and driveways and things like that. And for the most part, we shoot for a 6 or 7 foot sidewalk, so there's space for tree pits, just as like another barrier for sidewalk parking, but it is always an issue throughout the city. I guess that's it. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, that was great. And we'll add it up for questions. So any questions for Mike?
Never considered just putting in pavement instead of sidewalks?
Asphalt. I mean, it's been bandied about. I mean, I think right now by code it has to be concrete. But
You do a lot more.
it's
faster.
yeah, it's been discussed, I think, at higher levels, but I don't know where that sits at this point, to be honest.
Great.
Oh, that's personal. Yeah, I appreciate the like the iterative nature of how like you sort of invented this program and then like built upon it and like figured out different things. What were one of the bigger challenges you had to overcome? Was it legal? Was it
Oh man, that's a tough one. I guess I'm trying to think of like something that's common throughout. I just feel like every project has something to learn. I would say there's no such thing as like a small project. Like everything has the same level of issues that any other project, like a hard project, and what you might think would be a simple project. I don't know. I mean, to me, the biggest thing is always the sidewalk parking. Like us putting something in and then having someone like park right on it. Like, what's it doing? I think we've gotten a lot better at having the ability, and I credit neighborhood services to this a lot, to reach out to people who might not want these projects to happen, whether it's not like, oh, well, walking past my property or whatever, or, I don't want to adjust the street width so that we're like changing parking or whatever. I think that we, in terms of thinking our projects, we do have a compelling narrative of like, this is adjacent to a park. We're trying to get it so kids can walk to a park, or we're trying to get people to transit lanes and things like that. And again, I think the administration has been really helpful in ignoring some of the, small, loud voices that can potentially be killers for these kind of projects. But yeah, I think the biggest hurdle has always been just doing something. There's always 1,000 reasons why, like, oh, this might not work or this will lot. But I think just trying to keep things moving forward, pull the trigger on as many projects as we can, take as many funds as we can, kind of getting over the reluctance to try something new. I think it's really like opened my mind for like how you can do more projects as a municipality with like the limited things that we have. So.
Follow-up question to that I put into the chat. Well, many people make decisions by self-interest rather than community interest. Those naysayers that may have had pushback in the past, have you had any strategies to show how whatever improvements are being made benefit them personally?
Another good question. And I typically don't get, I'll admit, like, I don't get involved with these conversations. So I would guess that our communications people probably have plenty of stories of, you know, a lot of these projects before they start, if it's like in a neighborhood where there's a bunch of people, they will go out and door knock before the project and talk about like, oh, there's a project coming in, we're doing a new sidewalk, don't park on it afterwards, blah, 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 blah. But they will go door to door and knock. I'm sure that those conversations have plenty of kind of these topics, but I try to focus as much as I can on the engineering side and not get bogged down in those conversations. So I could probably ask them, but I'll admit that I don't get too involved with those. Oh, do you have any stories of having to talk to people about this?
Not too much. I mean, I think in our community, they already saw the value in it outside of just their own self-interest. You know, like I said, it's already a fairly walkable community. So anything to improve that, like you said, benefits everybody. So yeah, no, I couldn't say any real big stories or memorable story to them.
Yeah. I just had a question. I mean, we talk about the issues of parking on sidewalks over and over again. Is there any conversation happening around engineering old streets to, you know, making better design out of the streets that we currently have to mitigate some of that sidewalk parking? So like, just as an example, having, you know, a small Pittsburgh street, you can park on either side and it's a two-way street, and there's no way that you can physically fit that many things happening simultaneously. So I'm just curious if there's any conversations about like, sure, education is good, but some folks are just based on the self-interest going to continue to park up on the sidewalk because they don't want their car to get hit.
Physically, it really is raising the curb and putting in tree pits is really what I have in my arsenal.
Okay.
If you ask me, I would say take it in tow. I'm like, you know, but you know, that's obviously not the most popular thing in the world, but
Sure. But neither is like doing a one-way street, but parking on both sides, you know, like how we can work with the infrastructure that we have to set up design standards that's going to accommodate the different uses that people are trying to do.
and we definitely do that kind of a treatment. And I'm not sure what I've never initiated that and said to like our traffic group, can we make this a one way? Right. I do believe that if we get like enough through at once, or if they do like a petition or something like that, you can change a two-way into a one-way in that similar way. But I've never initiated from the parking on the sidewalk.
Yeah, it's just like we all want it to change, but you know, it seems like a bigger conversation than just education.
I would make it legal to key cars that are parked. Just key it would be my. You could get to the hospital if you
Get that
break your leg
box.
or whatever.
Yeah. All right, Milo, you have a question.
Yeah, you mentioned that one of our the communities that have the sidewalk conditions that are currently assessed.
Right.
Is there any priority or discussions of low income and marginalized communities to be prioritized with need programs or kind of assessing the condition of their sidewalks?
In terms of the volunteer-led conditions assessment, or just like it's
Just overall for projects for these.
Yeah. So I put in enough money to do the whole city.
Okay.
And I'm going to put it in again this year, just to hire someone to essentially like assess the whole thing. So I want to get it all done. But if we only did get partially funded, we would obviously be focusing on the communities with, you know, more high injury network roadways, as well as academic services. It's cool. Thanks.
You also have a question, you said.
Hey, yeah. Mike, great work on this. It's been really exciting to see this program evolve over the past couple of years. And I've been in touch with a lot of pedestrian and accessibility advocates that are very grateful for your work. So thank you. Along those lines, I'm curious, I heard you say that there are some ways you would like to be growing the program. seems like some more resources for staff and implementation. I'm wondering, like, if there were some magic words that advocates could be asking for, especially when we're talking to city council people about its capital budget and operation budget season. What are those magic words that advocates can be saying, hey, we need blank, and or anything else that people in the broader Safe Streets advocacy community can be calling on and asking for to make your job easier and more effective?
I think it always comes down to staffing. I mean, working in a municipality, like everyone's always wearing like 30 hats. We could always use more money, but I do think at this point we're probably pretty close to the ceiling. But we can handle when you take into account the other projects that me and my group are focused on. So I just think, I've been with Dowie since 2017, and seeing our capabilities expand with our staff expanding. I think there was only 5 of us when I started, and now we're up to like whatever, a lot. Shows you what is really important is the people that are doing work. And even if you have a contractor doing the physical work, you still need to manage it. You still need to go out a couple times a week to make sure everything's going okay. You need to be answering the phone when there's issues. So I'm always going to go back to staff. I mean, I'd love to be able to get a construction crew that is dedicated to us, but that would be a multi-year effort to get the right people, the right amount of people, the equipment, and all that. At this point, I think it is just staffing.
Great. Thanks. We'll work on it.
Thanks. All right, John Torak, do you have another question?
Yep, sorry, never took my hand down.
Great. All right, I had a question for you, Mike, and that was, you mentioned that you do sidewalk parking educations. What's that look like? Like, do you go meet with folks? Do you have a public meeting? Meet with residents?
That typically is done by our neighborhood services like our education people, but I believe that is also like a door-to-door knocking thing of saying like, this is, and a lot of times when we do a project like, should you go geofence things like that? Like that. We try to help with that by, like if we are putting a new sidewalk curb, like a lot of places in the city don't have like a parking lane, but a lot of times we'll try and stripe one in to reinforce when those neighborhoods are people go door to door. Park here. There's like a lot of honors. Keep going. Oh yeah, that one. Shit. Well, it doesn't show it. All right. In the areas where there are houses on this project, like we striped a parking lane, and when neighborhoods are pointed to it, like we're doing a new sidewalk, it's a parking lane. You don't have to worry about, like, it's double yellow, and like you don't have to worry about getting your mirrors hit because like we have enough space to put space. Yeah. Great. So yeah, I
that's good. I just wondered if there's like resources that could be used as a model or share with other municipalities, or if it was a more one-on-one discussion.
I personally, that's my understanding. Yeah. I don't think we don't have at this point like education program that we're pushing out.
Good too. All right. Any other questions? All right, great. Well, thanks so much for that presentation. It's great having both sidewalk presentations. Thank you for that. The next thing on the agenda is roundtable updates. And we have about 10 minutes left till the noon hour, which meeting is scheduled to end, but we can certainly go over. I will say for folks that are attending in person, we do have Panera Bread box lunches available after the meeting. We'll go ahead with any roundtable updates. I'm going to start with just announcing that the Yellow Goat Bike Club or Stop Bike Club rides that are open to anyone that would like to join us. We'll start the 4th Saturday in June. So our first ride will be Saturday, June 28th at 10 a.m. And we're going to ride the Montour Trail starting at Park Manor Boulevard and go to Enloe and back. So I'll get out some kind of schedule on that. I just wanted to share that. And if anyone else has an update they'd like to share, we'll go around. You can say you have something or pass. We'll start with you. Pass. Okay. Pass. All right.
I'm pass.
All right.
I won't pass. Please join us June 29th. It's a Sunday for the first open streets of the season. It's going to connect Stateside to Wilkinsburg. Kind of a combo of old routes and new routes and stuff like that. So it's going to be a really cool event. If you don't know what it is, we close the streets down. You can bike, walk, just enjoy the day. It's going to be very family friendly. Please join us. And then the following one's going to be the last Sunday in July, whatever that date is. And then I'll have it. What is it, 27th? I can't remember. I forgot to look that one up. And I also want to put a plug in for October 17th. We are partnering with the city's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure on the Vision Zero Summit. So if you like these conversations, you can do this for a full day at the summit. It's going to be on a Friday. And we'll be putting out more information shortly, specifically about sessions. Maybe you want to do a session, but also if you're work for a private company and you want to sponsor the event, I know some folks in this room already are. Then thank you. But October 17th, make sure you pencil that in your calendar, and more information should be coming out really soon.
Thanks, so.
I will pass. I am filling in for David White. I'm here from Hobo Bike Share. We celebrated our 10-year anniversary of Bike Share in Pittsburgh this past Saturday. So that feels like a big milestone for Bike Share here at Pittsburgh. And then I will just do another event plug. We have our community slow roll series that travels around to different neighborhoods throughout Pittsburgh. Our next one is going to be on June 21st. That's a Saturday from 4 to 6. And that'll be happening in Hazelwood at Eliza and Lytle. So you could come down, take a bike ride, and see that lovely raised intersection.
Okay, great. Thanks.
That's still everything.
Pass, thank you.
Pass. Good meeting. Pass. Pass.
Oh, funds. In Squirrel the PennDOT is planning to revise the approaches to the Squirrel Hill Tunnel to eliminate some of the conspicuous difficulties. And there was a public meeting a month ago, and there is additionally foot bike trail along the northern side, assuming that they can get permission from PennDOT to put bike trail within the right-of-way. We're hoping that they will notice other places where there are bike trail within the right-of-way, like downtown, where it was only separated by a Jersey barrier from the same parkway. But the good news is that they have several plans, several possibilities laid out, and they have a way to introduce bike connection along the north side of the highway, roughly from the run to Forward Avenue, where it will connect with an existing trail that takes a little ways into Greenfield. So we are happy that we got this far. And if it's an opportunity to comment on this project, please do comment supporting the inclusion of this trail, which Small Hill and Greenfield have been trying to get established for quite several years now. Good news.
All right, good deal. Thanks, Mary.
Greg Morris from Move Legal on Mount Lebanon. Move Legal is a nonprofit C3 that's volunteer led with the goal of having safer streets designed for people. We just have a bunch of people doing all sorts of great stuff. With the warmer weather, we have what I call a SWAT team that goes out and they'll help clean up overhanging bushes along sidewalks so that people can walk water securely. We have just released an update, long many years in coming, of an updated bicycle map of Mount Lebanon. We try to focus on local roads because it's kind of hard working with PennDOT. If we can deal with our local streets, that's pretty good. And one of the questions always is, well, people say people are just speeding down the street, and then the traffic engineers will come out and say, no, they're not. And so we've purchased this device called Telram, which basically put it in your window. It is in your house and aim it at the street, and it'll measure the speed of the traffic. It has artificial intelligence that will tell you it's a car, is it a bicycle, is it a pedestrian? And we have partnered with our library so that it has a barcode. You can check it out with your library card. And we're real excited about that. That just got started. Because we're focused on having being ahead of the curve when it comes to street projects in Mount Lebanon, we had our first walk audit by one of our parks last week. We have the other one coming up later this month, so that people who are interested in that area where there's a potential project that could say, here's what it means to me as a walker, and being able to comment on that through hours a week. If you have any more questions, I'll be here for lunch. Thank you.
Thanks.
Roy Wiles, Steel Valley Trail volunteer. Many of you know the Steel Valley Trail from Grant Street to Eastport is very rough with tree roots. We recently replanted it, halfway there. And it's an innovative project. Because what they've done is they've gone through and chewed up 10 inches of the trail. The asphalt, tree roots, base surface, replaced it, mixed in some concrete, concrete in each section. And then this week, we're going to go pave with the state with sewage and asphalt. And so if you've got tree roots in your trailer, this might be one way to consider dealing with that. It's a problem. We'll let you know in a couple of years whether it works or not. But this section has been encouraged to get roads ever since it got built, because local communities in the trail goes trees of the trail for the fence trees on both sides. So the trees just come right in front of the trail and put up.
All right, thanks for that update, Roy. All right, anyone online? Anything they'd like to share?
Yeah, so standing between you all and the box lunch and our virtual lunch, I've already put some things in the chat that folks can look at related to today's discussion about some opportunities. Beyond that, I have in the chat, we're working on our next land use decision-making webinar series, first one slated for August 6th on the impact of small farms in Pennsylvania economies and communities. So that's the first one. And then at the end, we're talking about AI use in community planning. I'm looking for somebody that has used artificial intelligence tools in development of community plans to pair with our extension specialist, Jim Ladley. Anybody has any suggestions, let us know. Let me know. Email address is there. And also, anybody that wants to be more ingrained in the development of this series, that's an AICP. It's always good to get the AICP perspective in this webinar, since it's one of the chief audiences for this series of educational sessions. So with that, I'll let you all get to lunch or on to the next speaker. Again, my email address is there if you would like to reach out.
All right, thanks, John. Anyone else on this?
One comment about AI, be very suspicious of the results. If you ever looked at the recent National House survey that came out for the National Kennedy, it was a basic flash. The itinerary. Be very suspicious of the result.
Yes, artificial intelligence can hallucinate, and it's one of the really strong recommendations to look at whatever you get from it and review it. And we'll go into much more depth in that November webinar. So I encourage you all to sign up for that. But again, we'd like to specifically see how it's being used in community planning. So, but thank you for that feedback, because yes, it is a very strong caution.
I've seen this often in other forums about they would really like to object to the use of art hallucinations. It amortizes the software, which is the wrong thing to do. It puts a cutesy spin on it got it wrong. And it's a cover up for there are just blatant errors and irresponsibility. And WebMD says if you're having hallucinations, go see a doctor.
I do want to inject though that while that is all incredibly valid, that is currently the industry jargon for it.
That is the industry jargon, and I have said this in many forums. I have published it. I've gone to the computing community. I've said this in international forums. I say it here as well. And I know it's the jargon, but it's wrong.
All right. Thanks for that. And I appreciated that interaction dialogue because that's how things get changed, right? You have to start with, I don't like that jargon. It's inaccurate. All right. With that, we'll call the meeting adjourned. And thanks again to everyone for attending and also very much for our presenters. Thank you.
Thanks.